It's another episode of the Christian Reeve Podcast, but are you subscribed? If not, make sure to like, share and subscribe. Spread the word about the Christian Reeve Podcast and enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve Podcast. Today's guest is a professional musician hailing all the way from Ottawa, Canada. His name is Ted Carty. Welcome to the show, Ted. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you for agreeing to do it. So a bit of background. I found Ted on Reddit, and sometimes, you know, as you guys know, my listeners, that's a bit more polite, isn't it? A lot of my listeners will know that I often find my guests through Reddit, through various subreddits such as Podcast, Guest Exchange and stuff like that. So if you are a new podcaster, definitely go check those places out. But anyway, I came across Ted in just one of these random music groups, and I'm a musician myself, so sometimes I post in some of these groups. And every now and again, I see a lot of musicians in these groups and stuff, and a lot of them are pretty good, but like every now and again you come across what I would term as like a little mini gold mine. And that was how it was for me when I found your music, because I was like, I'll go check this guy out. And then I was like, are you on Spotify? And you were. And I was just blown away by the music. So let's dive straight into that. So it's a three-piece acoustic band called Cold City Kings. Tell us how this band came to be and describe your band's sound.
To the first part of it, how it came to be, I'm coming up on a cool century of a half century of life at some point here in the near few years. And I've been through bands, and I was in a band for a long time, and I left that world mostly primarily because I had a family. Right. And that the band sort of continued on without me, and I was happy to see it go. I wasn't really big into the whole playing at 2 a.m. to in some town, some far away with some guy with some weird hat, like it was fun for a while, but it gets pretty old. Canada, I don't know if have you ever been here before? Have you ever played here?
No, I would love to, man.
No, it's really big. So that's one thing you got to remember. Like there's cities, but there's a fair amount of distance between them. So if you want to do 5 gigs in 5 cities, you're going to travel about 1,500 to maybe 2,500 kilometers to do that.
I feel like it's always kind of the same though when you start out as a musician, because you laid it out right there, like, yeah, sometimes it's us just playing to a couple of people, one person. Like I had that many times. I think in my first major band I was in for the longest time, for about 3 years, a lot of the shows we were often just playing to the other bands that were on the show, and sometimes it's hilarious, like looking back. Like my final show with that particular band, we literally played to just it was rough, man, because we knew we were about to break up. This was our final gig. We'd had like a mini argument before we were going on stage. We went and played, and literally there was my ex-girlfriend and the sound engineer, and that was it.
Yeah, there you go.
But
I've been there.
Do you know what I mean? Like every musician has been there, and it's kind of nuts when you think about it, because you can't let that dishearten you. I've told this story before, but I remember seeing a video online of, I think it was Rage Against the Machine at their first show together as a band, and they were playing some college somewhere, and they're playing like, it's like, arena style music, and people would, there are people watching, but mostly it's people going by and just passing by, and I'm like, this is nuts. But that's how it is.
But you know what? I was in a band that wasn't, it definitely wasn't a Rage Against the Machine, but the band I was in before was definitely a band that it was sort of like, the vibe of the music was intended to be really like short and, oh, sorry, I'm being interrupted by Justin Trudeau here. Bear with me. Justin Trudeau, I don't need to hear your garbage right now. I love you, buddy, but
does that often
tell me
happen?
when
The Prime Minister just interrupts you when you're doing
He just says, sorry, I apologize, Dad. JT, chill out. We'll get back to you in a sec. And then, you try to figure out the dynamics of trying to build a crowd and then trying to maintain a crowd and writing for that. And I was in a band that was a lot like that. And you have to perform as a unit. You have to think as a unit. It's like a marriage, but it's multiple people. And it's really people that you kind of really only have your best times with playing music. So there's a lot of other stuff, like if you were going to try to, share bank accounts with these people or get into debt with them or try to make sure you work on something all the time. Like it's really hard to keep pace with that. I was lucky I was in a good band, but I just also, into life and that type of thing. So I pulled back on it. And then I spent the next couple of years sort of going back into sort of the musical styles that I personally, my sort of genre that I've always loved. And I guess the best way you would describe it, and if you were going to sort of describe the Cold City Kings things, I mean, the broader term would be Americana. I think would be the broader term, because I mean, some of the influences for me as a songwriter have been, Hank Williams, the simplicity of something that could be played very elegantly and just sort of leave your mark. John Prine is probably, is and will always be for me like my greatest, songwriter. But at the same time, like I've always been just completely obsessed with the Beatles and the history and the post Beatles and the variations of it and the uniqueness of where they ended up after where they started. It's quite a saga. It's almost like a Tolkien story, right? It just never sort of plays out. But the songwriting in that, I've always sort of tried to figure out like how to, not to figure out the code, but just how to learn from it, like the succinctness of it, or the subject matter and how a subject matter is told, or the relationships between tension and release and space and sound and the sound of words, like that for me just became an obsession. And I was more or less alone in it. And I was asked one night to come in and host an open mic that was a friend of mine who at the time, who was in the band I was in before, who'd also sort of left it. And he had kids as well too. He was doing this open mic and I went in and sort of subbed for him hosting it. And this guy came in and he looked like, I remember when he walked in, I was like, kind of looked like Ryan Gosling, sort of like, but a little shorter. But I don't know how tall Ryan Gosling is because I've never stood to him. But just like he had this sort of stature, and he pulls out this, I forget what he was playing. I think it was a Gretsch or something, and a loop pedal. And I introduce him, and he gets up and he starts playing this version of "Ain't Necessarily So." Do you know the song?
I'm not familiar with it. No.
So this is a classic song. It's been covered by Louis Armstrong. I'm pretty sure Ella Fitzgerald did a version of it. It goes back to that sort of, we'll call it the sort of Tin Pan Alley era of songwriting, where it's, in the sort of songs that became popular amongst musicians and became standards.
Is this kind of Is this kind of like 1930s, 1940s music? Because
it is. So it starts around then, right? And it kind of carries all the way in through the 50s, and it influences everybody in the 60s. So everybody in the 60s that's bringing it back in either country. You see it in the Eagles. You see it in if you look at the sort of alt country, the Graham Parsons of the world. But then you see it again. You see it in Zeppelin. Like Zeppelin's repurpose of all the Muddy Waters stuff, all of the Robert Johnson stuff. So that's where that basin sort of generates itself. And it has the sort of troubadour story of traveling musicians, but it also has the music that these performers were like, they were forced by their environment of survival to be as unique and as powerful as possible. Like the story of how they came about, these musicians, to be able to make a record and play a song. Like they were literally the real deal. So these songs for me, like when I heard it, and I was just a fan that he liked it. Like nobody I knew liked this type of music. And we got together. His name is Connor, by the way, Connor Fleming. And then he brought in a friend. And the three of us just got together and we started writing. And we wrote a ton of music together. And I'd never been in a situation like that, where I would write a song, Connor would write a song, Neil would write a song, and they would all come from different perspectives with different sort of musical tastes. And Connor, by my measure, is one of the most brilliant guitarists and musicians that I've come across. He writes some really great music. But the three of us came together, and I think between the three of us, we probably wrote about 50 songs.
So I got a couple of
So,
interesting questions to ask you just on that alone.
mhm.
Firstly, I think I have an idea of what it is, but I'd rather just ask you directly. What exactly is a troubadour?
Well, I think it's a French term, but it was definitely, I think it's a term primarily of somebody who would be making their living playing music about the places they were trying to make a living at. They were minstrels in some capacity, but they were storytellers. So they would have a song, they would carry a song. A troubadour, as a general term, is somebody who is
Kind of like a journeyman, maybe.
a bit of somebody whose vision of the world expressed through music isn't just in the mind of the person. They're passenger on the music they write. Does that make sense? You know, like if you look at like Dylan, you know, if you look at Bob Dylan, you know, I don't know Bob Dylan, but I've definitely, you know, read and been obsessed with the man for as long as I can remember. But you when you sort of came on the scene, like he was coming into Greenwich Village kind of with this idea, or at least being or presenting that he was kind of wanted to be Woody Guthrie, right? That he wanted to be this traveling person who would read the, you know, picked up these songs from train cars, and you know, there was a story about that music.
So it's kind of more like a traveling storyteller who uses music as a medium as opposed to just a standard musician then.
Yeah, and I think that it's a marriage of both this type of songwriting, and then also the type of sort of concept that it's meant to evoke, you know, to some degree, because I think, you know, troubadours aren't DJs. They're not there to, they may try to make you dance, but it'll be in between moments of sitting and possibly weeping, right? And it's something that, generally speaking, you kind of, it's a bit like an authorship, I guess, story from a musical perspective. At least that's what it is for me. And the ones that I've always sort of been obsessed with, you know, they either presented their canon of music as, you know, they would have troubadour music in their repertoire, like Johnny Cash, for example. Like Johnny Cash is a musician, and I love Johnny Cash as well too. But Johnny Cash is also a story of a musician who sort of had a sound and a way about him, and went through so many different evolutions in his music career, all the Sun Records history and all of that. Do you know much about the history of Sun Records and the?
A little. I mean, I've seen obviously Walk the Line. I am pretty obsessed with like just 40s, 50s, 60s music in general. You know, everything from Hank Williams to Elvis, Johnny Cash, like Motown, like you name it. I love all of that stuff. So I have like a various understanding. From what I understand, wasn't Sunrise Records all of those musicians? So like when they started
it was just sort of one of those stories. When you read about it, you're like, wow, what a crazy situation that was. So I mean, the architecture of radio back then really was sort of, you know, you had a tower and you would broadcast on that tower. But if you owned that tower, you were typically recording music in and around that studio tower as well too. So, you know, that's sort of what spread radio around. So it wasn't that hard. I mean, not that it was easy, but you had these different places. And one of them in Memphis, Tennessee, Sunrise Records, has the history of literally the like three people off the top of my head I know walked through the door was Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, and Roy Orbison. So think about a place that just sort of accidentally brings in these three people in one form or another in this street in Memphis, Tennessee. So there's something about that. But I guess to my point, not to get too far deep in it, but with Johnny Cash, I always thought, because he became a recording star and he had to transcend through different records, and he had a very genuine way of sort of expressing the music he loved and making it his own, that he himself as a writer has a certain way of writing. And I think he became a better writer as he got older in his life. But for the first few years, the songs that he would be playing, you know, whether he'd be playing a country ballad, or he'd be playing a gospel ballad or something, he would have the troubadour songbook there, but he himself probably really wasn't one.
It's interesting, and I am gonna just state the obvious here, but like, you know, when I started songwriting, probably at a very young age, 11, 12 years old. I mean, I think everyone, when they become a musician for the first time, they just naturally start writing their own songs. Obviously, they won't necessarily be any good, but, you know, and like I probably started actually properly writing songs in my first band. So when I was like 17, 18, and I still stand by some of the stuff. I think it's okay. But I think that it wasn't until I took a big break from music, you know, I went and got a degree, I went and did a bunch of stuff in my life, moved to another country. And then I went through some very hard times, and, you know, music never stopped being a part of my life, but I kind of put creative to the side. I was like, oh, I guess that's just not for me. And it's funny how life works. It brings you back to the things you love. And so now I'm writing again, and I started writing again, I suppose, in 2019. And I mean, I try to be objective about my own work, but I feel like it's the best stuff I've ever written. And the reason for that is that I actually have stuff to write about now, you know, relationships, people, you know, friends dying, hard times, like, and I feel like bringing it back to what we were just talking about with those musicians like Johnny Cash and stuff, like, that's arguably what was so great about him, was that, you know, the music was real. You could relate to it. You could feel the pain, the anguish, the sorrow, the joy, everything in that music. And that's what I aspire to do with my music as well. Like, I feel like, you know, especially in this day and age as well, you know, there's so much music out there, and, you know, you don't have to be the world's best songwriter to write a good tune. I mean, a lot of the time, music, you know, as long as it's catchy, people will like it. But the songs that always get remembered, I feel, are those ones that go that step further and try to capture like a feeling, a human feeling in a moment, and just, you know, create something cool.
And I think that you know, if you're at a place right now where you're feeling like, hey, I'm writing the best stuff, there's probably you're writing a lot of stuff, or writing more often, or your mind is on writing more often. And one of the things that, you know, when I started off, you know how you said earlier, you said, you know, I think musicians all get into writing their own songs. I didn't. I mean, I was really afraid to do it, because I didn't like, because, you know what, I couldn't, the only thing that kept echoing in my mind is that Beck line: you can't write if you can't relate. And and you know, I found myself trying, and I was good in my old band. I was good for a line, or I was good for a hook, and I was pretty good at a verse or maybe a chorus, but I couldn't bring a good song across the finish line, at least one I would be happy with. And I avoided it. Like, it was sort of like kind of avoiding exercise for so long. And then, you know, once you start it back up, but I'd always pursued the interest in it. And I had some insight one year in my old band. And there's a thing in Canada that they put, I don't know if they still do it. It was called Canadian Music Week. And, you know, I mean, there's a lot of, you know, celebration of indie music when it means somebody's making something off of the $100 pass or whatever it is, right? But outside of somebody needing a crowd, very few people give a shit about it, other than the people who love it and make it. But you know what I mean, like festivals and all these types of things. And I love them as well too. And don't get me wrong, like, I've played a few of them that I think are like run by the sweetest people, and they've got these great things. But at some point, anyways, long story short, I got into a circle of, I got into a workshop, and the workshop had some insight from two very prolific songwriters. One of them you may know, one of them you may not. It depends, you know, if you're Canadian or not. So one of them you probably know, Gordon Lightfoot. And have you ever heard of Gordon Lightfoot?
No, there are some Canadian musicians I know, but mostly it's just a matter of discovery for me at this point. I found some musicians that I really like from Canada, but mostly I don't know.
Gordon Lightfoot became quite famous internationally. I mean, if you Google him, what you'll probably do is you'll probably find there's a number of songs you're like, oh, of course I know this guy. It's just,
Right.
it's again, he's Gordon Lightfoot in Canada. I mean, he's a very prolific songwriter. He's made incredible music, and he's influenced the time. He's influenced. He sort of came up in the 60s and 70s. And the other songwriter too was the songwriter of a band who really influenced the country, and we all grew up on them. It was a band called Tragically Hip, and the front man of that band was a gentleman named Gord Downie. So you can imagine like two Canadian guys named Gord, of course, right? Like so. And so they were having this conversation about songwriting, and they're both in, like the Tragically Hip. From my account, if you're a fan of them, you're a fan of them entirely, not just because of their sound, but in the genius of so many of their songs. I would put Gord Downie up there as probably one of the greatest lyricists that's ever written a song, because he can write a song with some words that you will not understand the meaning of that song, even though you'll love it and you'll sing it in your head and you'll sing it in the shower. You will not understand the meaning of that song until at some point in your life, and you'll realize that this was set up for you. And It's a weird sequence. And anyways, I won't go into it. But one of the things they said, you know, music is all about the right balance of contrast and tension and release and space. That's what music is when we consider it theoretically. That's why certain chord progressions work in a certain way, because they have the right relationship of either call and answer or minor and major. There's a it's like a ship that balances itself on a certain perfect back and forth, right? We've got timing. And you know, they said, when we want to evoke sentimentality, we don't write sentimentally. If the music evokes sentimentality, there's more space to write sentimentally. And what is writing sentimentally? Writing sentimentally, in their definition, in my interpretation of what they said, really means that you are trying to explain the emotion you want felt, as opposed to letting the listener feel it by setting up a circumstance that may evoke sentimentality. So storytelling does this very, very well. We can set up a phrase in a story that implies something but doesn't say it, and the listener feels it. It's like you've thrown it to the listener and they've caught it. When the listener fills that space with their own emotional interpretation, then what they do typically is they will start in a path of anticipating the next frame of music. And if at the end of that frame of music, they have found an emotional relationship to the space you've created, they will like that song, and that song will have meaning to them. And so it's the implication. So words in songs, and that's what I took from it, is that words in songs are kind of like road signs of where you want the person to go, as opposed to a map.
Okay.
All right. And there's a succinctness in your ability to place these road signs at the beginning, middle, or end of a song or in a verse, so that the listener or the person listening to your song becomes invested in the next part. They get satisfied and thus invested again. And if at the end of that song, and if they make it to the end of that song, because some people will listen to a song because they like you, they think you're nice. Some people will just listen to you because whatever, they think you're curious. But I think the people that listen to a song would be like, wow, that song meant something to me, and it happens to me all the time.
Right.
I got lost in it, sort of. And so what does that mean? It's sort of like I invested my imagination into this. It triggered something, and I was gone for 3.5 minutes, and you had me. And I want my fix again. I'm going to go back and hear that again, or I'm going to be like, what was that line? Or it'll now live rent free in my head. And that is where I'm trying to figure out, as a writer, how best to not architect my songs to do that, but consider that when I'm trying to write a song and see what happens. But I'm always in a process of trying to get better.
I think I know where you're coming from. I mean, if I've understood correctly, it sounds kind of like my approach to songwriting as well. Because my current form of songwriting right now comes from how I write poetry. So like years ago, I started writing poetry. Well, again, when I was a teenager, but it kind of happened by accident. Like I'd write
Yeah.
stuff and I'd be like, well, this isn't really a song. I guess this is a poem. And then I kind of delved into that world a bit. No expert by any means. Like I just put stuff out there. And for me, I don't think too much about like, oh, it needs to be like this, it needs to be like that. I just kind of write how I feel and try and, to your point, like put forward an idea, a story. I try and leave it open to interpretation. Like my first poetry book was called Open to Interpretation, and yeah, maybe it's a bit cringe and silly, but the idea was that like I want all of my work to be like that. And then I started applying that logic to songwriting and thinking, do you know what? Okay, it's fine if sometimes it's really obvious, but what if like sometimes it's not? What if, you can get several things from this? Like one of the themes that I have a lot of the time in my songs, because I have a tendency to write sad songs. I don't plan it.
I love writing sad songs. It's my favorite type of song.
Yeah, me too. And the irony is that I've actually started writing happier songs recently. But when I write sad songs, I always try to do the same thing of like, you pose a sadness, a sorrowful situation or question or something like that. And then I try to kind of build through the song as though it's a person trying to overcome this thing and get to like a better place, a point of hope, a point of, reference. I don't know.
But and I think there is like I'm a fan of a lot of songs like that sort of try to take you. They know they're taking you on a journey.
Right.
You're going to go somewhere, and we're going to start with this form and this musical phrase or whatever we're going to put forward that kind of gives you this idea, right? And then there are some songs that are sort of like, let's turn that on its head, like I'm very creative, and I'm very like, I try to, the best songs I've ever written come from a really, really deep emotional place.
Right.
And when I play songs for people, they say, wow, okay, that song was pretty good, but the one you played, that song was really good. And I'm like, well, I know, with one song you kind of like, well, I spent a lot of time on that. Well, that one just came from the right place. Like I had a really deep moment where the songwriting was really cathartic at some level. But, I'm always trying to catalog the different archetypes and of forms of songwriting. And if I get your side of it right, like your process here is to sort of, we have a premise, we have an idea of something, and we're going to articulate that premise, but do you want that same premise reiterated by the end of that song, or do you want that person to have more of a catharsis at the end of that song where they feel a little bit more like, you've taken them on a journey? And some songs do that and some songs don't, right? Some songs just surprise you, and the surprise is enough for you to be like, hey, I like that. Some songs shock you, and some songs just sort of like have a beat or a melody that you just cannot deny. And you could literally write almost anything on top of that, and it's still going to connect with people. Mm-hmm. And that's what always amazes me about it. Like I'm always trying different techniques of songwriting, but I'm also trying to, as I absorb more and more songs and I listen to more and more stuff and I write more and more music, I'm finding myself just always on this sort of kind of this trajectory to try to be as succinct as I can with, and try to be as less sort of worried about whether or not the idea I have for that song is a good idea or a bad idea, and more concerned of, is the idea I have for this song connecting? So it's almost like you can have a bad, not a bad idea, but you can have kind of like, hey, I have an idea for the song, and it's sort of like the way you feel when somebody leaves you and that type of stuff. And that's great. I mean, that feeds so many songs in the world. Heartbreak is like the number one reason for most songwriting attempts in the first place, right? But at some point you're kind of like, okay, how I formulate that idea in a song is the challenge, if you will. And you'll never really know because you got to taste it yourself, but it doesn't taste the same to everybody else. That's the tricky part about songwriting. It might taste good to you, it doesn't taste to someone else.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's part of the reason why I want mine to be as open as possible, because I want the listener to kind of take their own sort of thing from it. But this kind of reminds me of Metallica's drummer Lars Ulrich. Like one time I remember someone asked him about his drumming, sorry. And there's a lot of, there's mixed feelings about it. Some people feel like he's too basic, or he's a crap drummer or whatever. I think that's nonsense. But one thing that he did say that stood out to me was he said that he always plays to the song, as in like his mindset is not, okay, I need to put like loads of drum solos here, drum, fills, blah, blah, blah. It's like what works for the song. And I feel
absolutely, yeah.
That's always the most important thing. It's like, does this feel right? Like sometimes, like these days when I write a song, a lot of the time, and this is different from years ago. Years ago, I would sit there for ages trying to write stuff, and I get depressed because I'd be like, I can't do it. This is rubbish. And like, genuinely, I felt that way. And these days, I'll just pick up the guitar and start jamming. And if I feel it, I'll write something. If I don't feel it, like sometimes I could think of times, some days, even recently, where I'll write a song and I'll be recording it and doing stuff. And then I'm like, no. And then I'll come back to it the next day with a completely different riff, completely different vibe. And I'm like, this is it.
Yeah.
It's weird.
It's funny. When live music was a thing, I was also pretty, I brought a lot of Cold City Kings was getting together and we were rehearsing and playing. We played a number of gigs, but we weren't getting into the big, let's promote ourselves. Like you can't get out there as a band and be ready to gig a lot unless you're ready to promote yourself. And doesn't mean you shouldn't be making music. It just means that, maybe you're going to limit where you're going to play. But I was out there quite a bit, and I would take this path where I'd be like, write this song, and I'd bring it to the group. And we would collectively say, okay, that's a Cold City King song, or a song that's like, definitely we'll record it as a group. Or people are like, okay, that's a bit more of like, we'll call it like the troubadour type of stuff. Not that we're not going to do that type of stuff, but it was just, we kind of had a vibe going at the time, and it produced a lot of really good songs. The album that you heard is essentially what I would say our final versions of essentially the best of the first, say, 12 songs that we've written at the beginning.
Yeah, so this is your first release as a band. It's an 8-track.
As our band, yeah.
Yeah, 8-track album called A Letter from Home. Is that correct?
A Letter from Home, yeah. And the single on that, or what, when we finally put all these songs together, and we produced this ourselves, and I'll give Connor Fleming just such an incredible credit, because he led the production. He built this rudimentary studio in his apartment, and it's such a fun cycle too, because when we started working on this together and writing these songs, we thought about, okay, well, let's go out and go get these done in the studio somewhere. And Connor was just so meticulously visioned on how he wanted these songs to sound, and he was like, I can do it. And he's an educated musician. He's studied jazz guitar and jazz guitar theory for a long time, and playing with him has been the best musical education I've had. And for me in the writing process too, I had to also find my recording voice properly over the last couple of years, which is a really interesting process sometimes, because when you cut yourself live and you're playing live all the time, sometimes you don't always know really where your recording sound should be.
Live
it's a
voice
weird
is different.
Experience. Yeah.
Live is different.
And so it took me a while to find mine, and then we finally got it ready, and we got it out the door. And so Holiday is the #1 track on that. And that's the one that I think resonates the most with people. It's a great little song. That was written by Connor. It's a brilliant song. It took me a while to sing it properly. I also do the backing vocals on everything as well too, while I'm layering it. So I get a lot of melody interpretation from the guys too. But some of the other songs on there, like Little Town is one of the ones I wrote, which is a bit more ballady and a bit more you know, again, with the attempt of evoking sentimentality as opposed to writing sentimental. But that was also another sort of very sort of, you know, emotionally generated song. Neil, our bassist, wrote Arrow True, which is on the album as well too, which is a great song. And he's a great writer as well too. And we've got a number of songs of his that he's written that are in the can and ready to go. But he writes songs that are very, they're very poetic, but they're also can be very jarring. Like they can have a very jarring message. I would almost sort of like, you know, before I go on, like, who are your favorites? Like, what kind of songwriters are you like obsessed with?
Wow. So many. I mean, just stuff. Okay. Like I listen to like all types of music. So
Yeah,
it's difficult for me to, but just off the top of my head, you know, like Bowie, Mac DeMarco,
yeah.
Dallas Green.
Oh, you like Dallas, eh? You're a big fan
I
of Dallas, eh?
love Dallas Green. I think he's an amazing songwriter. I think when
He's a great guy too. Yeah, I've met him before. He's a really sweet dude.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool,
He's a local. Well, he used to be in a cool band called Alexis on Fire.
Yeah,
and they played my university
it's funny, you know, because like
cool
I thought they were a good band and I loved them and everything, but like when he started doing his acoustic stuff, I just felt like, yeah, this is what you should be doing. This is like
totally
major.
Yeah,
like, and it's nothing against Alexis on Fire because I felt like his kind of his contribution to that band just made them very distinctive. I can't think of many bands that were doing that kind of vibe and that kind of contrast, you know, having like a really clean vocalist. And don't get me wrong, I know there's loads of, because before I get destroyed, I know there's loads of metalcore bands that do.
But it's a different vocal. It's a totally different vocal.
It's
soy sauce, and it's like soy sauce, and I don't know.
Do you know what I think it is?
But I totally get you, and you're right, and the right proportions, and they did they did the right thing, because he also would have. I think you might as well call it like there was this phase there where it was coming out of Ontario too. There's a lot of sort of like bands like, you know, Cancer Bats, and
I love
there's
Cancer
another one
Bats.
that's or even if you're a fan of like Billy Talent. Like
I love Billy Talent.
Yeah. So they all came out of the same scene, right? More or less, right? So they had this sort of like driving guitar. The kids in those shows were all in a pit. It was for that aggressive type of thing. And they had this sort of like, you had to have a hook, and you had to have a bridge, and then you had to be like in your face for 2 verses. And that was like this sort of way. And they did it better than most bands at the time. But I agree, when he came on as a solo artist, I think he was one record in and he became part of like the great Canadian canon. Like when your song that you release all of a sudden is played by every Joe Henry in a bar within 6 months, like that thing in Canada doesn't happen that often.
Yeah.
You know, it's rare you get something. And he, like, you can't walk in a non-COVID, well, you can't walk down a street sometimes in Canada without hearing somebody doing not a very good version, because he's a hard guy to copy because he's got such a unique voice, right? He sings in such a weird register, right? Yeah. If you sing his songs and you don't put the same sort of power balance that he has into that, the songs don't come off as across. Like
I've done some of his stuff. I've done a couple of covers of his, and I know what you mean. It's you got to get the balance between that kind of soft and like balladies. I don't know how to put it. Like, I know what you mean. You got to push yourself at the right points and dial it back at other points.
Yeah, because he gets some great, and he's a good songwriter, and he's got some great stuff. And I always listen to everything he puts out and that type of thing. And but he's a good dude, and I know he's a hardworking musician as well too. I don't know where they're all going to be, like the working musicians are going to be post-COVID. But you also said Bowie, eh? I'm nuts for Bowie. I've always been nuts for Bowie.
Especially now. I don't know what it is. I think, do you know, there was something about just my 20s in general. I'm 27 at the moment, about to turn 28. And
you're a young lad.
Yeah, a lot of these years, my 20s has been very transformative, and kind of, I feel like I've learned more now than I've ever learned, and I find myself kind of how can I put this? I find myself kind of questioning everything a lot more these days, and sometimes I'll just sit there and I'll just listen to, like, recently I've just been watching a lot of Bowie interviews and just hearing him talk and hearing his philosophy on life, and
Yeah.
it just fascinates me. I think it's because there's certain musicians that like are ahead of their time. Like Jim Morrison is a good example. Like you listen to his work and it's like, or even his poetry. I mean, he's so ahead of his time. And these musicians come like once in a lifetime. And
Yeah.
I think that's what sets them apart. You know what I mean? Because there's a difference between a good musician, a star, and then an icon. And I know that's really going far, but I would consider Bowie to be that level, you know?
Oh, he's absolutely. And, you know, at Bowie, I think one of the things about Bowie that resonates with people, and I think this is what he's always put out there, whether it's been in his music or whether it's in his personality or his persona or his, you know, when you see him on interviews, Bowie presents like, it's an almost insufferable boldness in front of every questionable circumstance most people would not feel bold in. So I think that's why he speaks so highly to people who don't feel bold enough to be who they are, because he is nonstop bold. He's never been apologetic. He's been nothing but kind. You'll never hear of Bowie doing anything cruel. He was never a womanizer, from what I understand. He was never a homophobe. He was never an isolationist. He was never a nationalist. He was never a bigot. He was always a champion of just being insufferably who he is. And you know what, if you think about it, you look back on him, Bowie was a weird looking cat, man. Like
Yeah.
and you could picture him growing up in post-war England and being that kind of dude and just trying to figure out your way. You know, it's sort of like the story of Little Richard and being like this gay, black, you know, I believe son of a sharecropper, if not son of a slave, who really just needs to find his expression and becomes one of the biggest influential musicians of all times, writing a song called Tutti Frutti, Oh Rudy. Like, think about that level of just audacity. And I love that. Like, I think that when you use that, when that's who you are and the music that's going to come out of you, that's where I think you see people where they're iconic like that. You know, I think Elton John's a lot like that. I think Lady Gaga's a lot like that. I think you saw that for many, many years come out of the prideness. And that's another thing. You see it in hip hop as well, too. The prideness and the boldness of being whomever you are, you know, like it's just, I feel like it's that foundation. And Bowie always did that. And even his songs, if you look at all of his songs, they're all about this. Even the longer, more narrative songs, and you break them down, like Bowie songs in my mind, when I listen to them, they're like 10 songs in each verse. Like each verse could be its own song. And there's stories that he writes that are really epic. And some of them he writes in reverse. And some of them he creates a theme and then he shatters the theme and then he creates a brand new theme in the song and you don't notice it. And you're singing along to this thing, you know, and you see him. He's also got songs. Like, think about a guy like that who has that many songs that are that long. Okay. Bowie did not write short songs. He wrote songs and he pushed it. Like, Bowie songs are like 4. You know, always say, oh, you got a 3.5-minute song if you're going to be a hit or whatever. It's like, no, here's, you know, Life on Mars. I think it's almost like the radio cuts like 5 minutes and 25 seconds or any of that stuff. Or think about like how he arranged stuff. I always sit there whenever I'm listening to a Bowie song and I sit back on it and I'm like, just think about the guy trying to cut this in the studio. And he's like, okay, this is where the orchestra is going to kick in. And we're going to have the orchestra go here. And then this is where the soul voices are going to kick in. And this is where we're going to break. And this is where, like, he just, like, it's madness. And then you listen to it and you're like, that's epic.
You know what's interesting as well? Like, because since we're talking about Bowie, I remember listening to his like late 60s stuff when he was still figuring himself out. Like, you know, he went through a bunch of name changes and stuff, and he eventually settled on Bowie, and he put out Space Oddity very early. I believe 1969 was the first version of it. And if you listen to that,
it was Brown, right? David Brown, or what was his name before Bowie? His real name?
So
I forget what it was, but yeah.
It was a name that was already taken by someone, and then he went for Tom Jones.
Tom Jones, yeah, I know.
You know, and then and what happened is he was like that for a while, and then Tom Jones obviously became big, and then he was like and then he became David Bowie. And here's the thing about Bowie that inspires me so much, and particularly with my own songwriting as well, is that like if you listen to that first cut of Space Oddity, it's okay. Yeah. You know, it fits that kind of weird, kooky kind of like vibe that the late 60s had, particularly with, you know, everything that kind of out of this world, space like atmospheric.
Yeah, it does sort of start with that 60s reimagining, because of that all the big space wars.
But that's the thing, like the first cut is like, it's not quite there yet. The song doesn't feel done, and Bowie's a genius.
Yeah,
I can't sing his praises enough, because he redid the song early 70s, you know, Ziggy Stardust era, and then the song was done. Then it was complete, because he and I imagine this, I mean, I don't know if he's ever confirmed.
Yeah.
Like, he reimagined it. He added the orchestra and everything else.
Oh, yeah.
And it all kind of comes together, and it's like, that was probably his vision for it in the beginning, but I don't think he'd really kind of come into his own yet. He hadn't become Bowie yet. But when he put that out, Bowie was born.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think sonically he did capture something, because like when you hear a lot of his early stuff, like I think what he's trying to do is write a hit in his early stuff that doesn't make it too. It's okay. It's kind of, he's trying to write a hook, and he's also got a lot of like, he's got this influence in the early stuff that I've heard of his. Like I don't go through the full canon of it, because my guy, like most people, I start with the Spiders from Mars experience and go from there. But I also like Bowie for me too. Like in the 80s as well too. I grew up. So I'm 46. I'm a lot older than you. And Bowie kind of like, when I was a kid, he was like that dude in Labyrinth, right? I was trying to like figure that guy out. But that's when I started to like him, because I remember there was a song that he does in that movie, and I watched it recently. And I think he writes all the music in that movie.
Yeah.
If you ever do it. But yeah, and then but I think he was trying, like most of them too. Like you even hear it in the Beatles as well too, right? There's an attempt to be something that you think you want to be, right? Like, and then they go right into their own, and then the world just sort of like defines them afterwards.
That point though that you made about he was trying to write a hit. That's very interesting you say that, because before we started this podcast today, I was on TikTok. I was just looking at things, and this clip of David Bowie came up, and he was this probably would have been the 90s or something. It's just a standard interview. He did a lot of interviews in the 90s, actually.
Yeah.
I implore everyone to go check out online on YouTube.
Yeah.
His interviews are fascinating, not because of just learning about him, but learning about what it means to be an artist and what's successful. Now, bringing it back to what you said. Yeah, in the beginning, I believe you. I think in that late 60s, early 70s, just before Ziggy Stardust, I feel like he just wasn't getting it quite yet. He just didn't figure it out. And then basically what he said in this interview was that, like, as an artist, you can't put stuff out to try and please everyone, because it's you'll never win that war. It's a thankless thing. So you've got to put out,
absolutely.
That's the thing. You got to put out your art, your vision. And I think once he just realized that's what I need to do, whether it's people love it or hate it, I have to put out my vision. And when he put that out, it connected with people. and it
Yeah.
clicked and it was the right time. And he just rolled with that ever
Yeah.
since.
One of my favorite lines, I'm pretty sure it's Bob Dylan. So people will say, that's not Bob Dylan, somebody else. But what was the line I read once a while back that said, the only way to write great songs is to write the bad ones first. and I really do think you start a process, right? Yourself.
Yes.
You start a process yourself. And I think I remember when I wrote my very first song that I was happy with enough to say, okay, I'm finished the song and I think it's good and I'd play it for somebody. And it wasn't a great song. It was too long and it had kind of didn't go too many places and it was kind of in a minor key and it was, the idea I thought was a really good idea for the song just didn't click with people. Okay. But I was happy with it and I finished it. And then I wrote a bunch of this. And this is when I started really writing my own stuff. And I'd been doing this since I was a kid. Okay. So I've been doing this since I was about 14, playing guitar, singing, performing, doing all that type of stuff. I didn't really finish the first song that I was happy with until I was about 33, maybe 34 years old. And the reason was I hadn't found anything in my life that I felt really just could help pull a song out of me.
Yeah.
So you kind of often, sometimes I feel like some songs come out of you faster because as your brain is now thinking about songs and you're thinking about meter and you're thinking about words and the sound of words and you kind of got a melody in your head and your brain is open to more stuff, right? And then somebody walking down the street says something cool and you're like, there it is. So you're like ready to catch that thing that maybe you were waiting for or the thing that starts you. So it's almost like you're likely to catch more rain in your pockets if you're walking out there with your hands up in the air. Do you know what I mean? So you kind of have a bit more, and that could be a good line for a song, right? If your hands are down by your side, your pockets lids are down, you're not going to catch any drops, right? So that type of thing, you have to be present for it. But it doesn't come with the sensibility you may want it to. I think it comes. I think if you stay practiced and ready, and you just keep trying, then you get out of it. I think for a lot of people, you also have a really good voice. You sing well. You carry tone well. Like you can also, and you have an ear for your own voice, and that itself is an instrument that you're going to tune in different ways over the years as you find more things meaningful to say. And the more you marry that relationship between something meaningful to say and something meaningful sounded out of you, you're going to find more people are going to not only be like, hey, that's a good song. People being like, hey, that's a hell of a song. Like, wow.
It's a process. It's weird. A process. Yeah. Like I remember when I was in my first metal band, the band broke up. I was about just shy of 21. I think I was 20. I went in I joined a couple of other metal bands. I was pretty lost, to be honest. I didn't really know what to do because I wanted to keep.
What kind of metal? Sorry, what kind of metal music were you playing? Just give me a sense there. I love metal too. I got nothing against metal. I'm all in for it, man.
No, it was just post-hardcore heavy metal. It was and basically, like I would always write the lyrics and a lot of the main rhythm guitars, but it was always like a jamming like it was, we would finish the songs as a band, it was very much like a band thing. So then when I started going solo in that year, because I was kind of forced to, I couldn't really find any musicians to work with, and I figured I might as well give it a go. I was forced to kind of do acoustic. I was lost. I put out an EP at that time. It was not good. Throughout the intervening years, I worked with various people and on my own. And again, it's like what you said before. I just felt like it was bad. And every time I would pick up a guitar, I would get like really disheartened. I'd listen to it and I'd be like, this is rubbish. This is not good. I don't understand. How was it, that I was able to write good songs before, but not now? And it goes back to what I said earlier about, you know, and what you said as well. Like you have to kind of go through stuff in life and realize certain things, and like you said, learn about your voice, learn about instrumentation, learn about all these different things. And I think the biggest thing for me that changed, and it will sound a bit out there and weird, but I am kind of like that as a person. I stopped thinking about it. I stopped thinking, I need to write a song. I need to like try really hard and think about it. I just basically thought, if an idea comes, not just with music, anything, for a poem, for a sketch, an acting piece, a video for YouTube, whatever. Like if an idea comes, I'll work on it. I'll see where it goes. And that's how I feel every time I pick up that guitar now. Sometimes I just jam and something comes. Sometimes I have an idea, a lyric, a thought, something, and you kind of just see where it goes. And I feel like that every musician is different. Everyone has a different process, but that for me is the process. Like, I don't really understand that idea that people get writer's block. Like, I feel like that can only happen if nothing is going on in your life, which means if that's the case, you need to like go do something, like anything, you know, go try.
I think that's definitely, absolutely. Like you have to be present for when a moment comes. I remember watching an interview with, you know, another great Canadian musician who I know you've heard of, Neil Young. Who is, you know, written, you know, again, some of the best music that's ever been written. And he takes people on journeys that you may not like it. Like, you know, one of the things about a Neil Young song, it's like some people like Neil Young are just like, I love this song, but I hate this song. And I listen to it from the beginning to end. And Neil Young knows that. And when he writes that song, and then there are some songs where you're just like, that Neil Young writes, and you're like, I can't breathe in the middle of the song.
It's just
too beautiful. It's weird
because they get overplayed. That's the only reason.
Well, you know, like, but I mean, like, you know, when I look at things like, when I look at his canon work, but one thing he said too, and I saw this quickly, he was like, and in so many of those songs of mine that are like the ones that everybody loves, he goes, I can't tell you I owned that experience. I was part of it, but I didn't own the experience. And you never really do. You have to be ready for the experience, and the experience will deliver a song through you. But it's not something like, it's not like Michael Jackson's moonwalk that he can do anytime he wants. It's something that you have to almost like, I think you go through these things where you're like, okay, I'm going to write this song. I have this idea, and you're working on it, and you're getting there, and it's probably going to be a good song. It might be a great song. And then you're going to finish that. And then maybe you'll put the music away or something. And then maybe you'll pick up your guitar the next time to go and play that song that you were working on. And you'll just start strumming around on something, and a really good idea for a song is going to come right to you. And it's not going to finish itself, but you're going to be like, I'm actually going to work on this new idea instead of that old song. And that process is like, you didn't command the better song to come to you. You were there, and you at least were disciplined enough to say, okay, I'm going to follow through and get it done, or I'm going to get it down, or I'm going to try and take the idea to the next step. But I think that for me, the most satisfying moments are when I do have one that's written and it does come out fairly quickly. But one thing I also love about my band is my band is also really good at giving me advice and thoughts on a song that will also resonate with me. And that's one of the things about music. I think sometimes people worry, especially songwriters, they're like, will everybody like this song? Nobody will like that song. Like, there's no song in the world that everybody likes.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there are some songs that most people like, but songs are not things, I think, that everybody likes. Songs have meaning, and to everybody it has a different meaning. And to some people it has meaning because you loved it when you were a kid. Sometimes it has meaning to you because you really related to the lyrics of the song. Sometimes it has meaning to you because the song makes you feel happy, but you have meaning with it. But the meaning isn't ubiquitous. It's not the same meaning for everybody. And that you don't have any control over. I don't think any songwriter has control over that. That's a bingo draw at best, right? So we'll see. But for me, that's all I'm trying to do myself, is to just try to get in my mind, as good of a songwriter as I can be, and keep pace doing it, and try to have the right relationship with my creative life that's going to give me the best chance of not only writing a great song, but also being part of that process where you don't own the experience. The song comes out of you, you own the song, it's your song, but you'll know for a fact, you're like, man, I wish I could do that a dozen times.
Has being a father and a family man drastically changed the way you write music? How, because obviously it changes your perspective in life and everything like that, and I just wonder sometimes if that has a profound effect on your music, perhaps.
I don't really know. I mean, having children has a profound effect on you at all levels, I think. I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but it has for me. But you know what, it's not like there's a knock at the door, you open it up and there's a profound effect and it hits you, right? You don't realize it until you're sort of wow, I've changed as a parent. I think I've wanted to create more of a legacy of good songs for my family and for my children. So when I think about writing a song and I think about recording a song, this doesn't sound weird, but I think about my daughter's children or children's children listening to this song, because you're creating something that lives in perpetuity. That's the fun thing about music and songwriting, because it doesn't exist. It's a weird thing when you think about it. You can write it down, those are the words, and you can have a recording of it, which is a copy of somehow it was played, or you can have an instrument that plays a song, or you can even have a song sung, but it doesn't exist. It's not a tangible thing you can hold. And if you sing a song, it's like philosophy. If you sing a song to a dog, it's the same vibrations. It's meaningless to the dog. It's only meaningful to our other human beings. Music doesn't have a relationship with the universe other than us. We're the only ones who hear it. We're the only ones who build it. We're the only ones who know about it. I'm sure there's I don't know if there's scientists that are out there that's saying, there's a sense of rhythm and cadence and all of these different animals and types of things. But
I get what you mean. We give it meaning. Because music is noise. Music is vibrations. It's a collection of things.
It's just vibrations, yeah. And we don't even know. We see some mathematical relationship with those vibrations. We can see that. We can add it and subtract it and multiply it. We can harmonize, and we can harmonize as the opposite of melody in our musical phrasing, so that we can create that relationship with it. And we have a mathematical situation, but it's almost like I guess it's the same way you look at numbers, right? It doesn't make any sense to anything else out there other than us, right? That's just how we use it. But music I think is even more weird, because at least using math, you can get a building everybody can see. When we create music, we just get sound, and sometimes we can layer that sound on TV or on a movie, and you can take your song and go to America's Got Talent, but that's not a music product. That's a television product. Music plays a little role in it, but it's not a music product. And when you hear Bowie, what's interesting thing about this, when you hear Bowie or when you hear Queen, you hear these artists whose arc in their creative period also coincides with a really interesting technology arc about how music gets played. And it starts in the wall of sound Motown era, where you're only hearing jukeboxes, 45s, and AM radio. So the sound of the song has got to be really big. That's Phil Spector's wall of sound technique. But when you get into records and LPs and high fidelity and big stereo systems, and then disco and clubs that are investing tons in sound systems, because we're creating big sound out there. And Bowie's going to fill that big sound. Queen will fill that big sound. Rush, Zeppelin filled that big sound too, but their timings work out, because the music that they're creating resonates on the medium that they're either creating for, or they just happen to be in at the time, right? And so now when you look at it and you consider, well, how is music being consumed? Well, we can still consume it with our ears, but we don't have a we don't have a collective relationship with it anymore. We have a very individual relationship with it. It's my playlist. It's what I'm listening to on my headphones. It's what I'm thinking about in the car. It's what I'm using in my things. I'm not gathering people together. It's not emanating from a jukebox. It's not trying to get me to dance, unless it's music I'm trying to use to work out or whatever it is. But I'm now having this one-to-one relationship. And people like yourself who are like, okay, I'm a creative, but I'm also a creative and I have these media forms that I'm working with, which isn't just creating something and pushing it. It's interacting with people. It's changing your art and changing your vision as you go out and trying to change others, right? You become very, you have a choice to become very symbiotic with a lot of the media that you are using to create for good and bad reasons, right? And that has an effect on how that music then gets created. And you know, one thing I read the other day, and I don't know if it's true because everything you read is just data. You can figure out if it's truth-esque, but you know, it was this idea that bands as a form of an art form is sort of falling off because, well, things like COVID, but production and songwriting and the whole cycle of getting a song from your head to the world can be done so much individually now, or done so digitally that it almost doesn't warrant. And I don't necessarily agree with that, because I think music created in a silo is fine, but I think it's rare that adding more people to the creation in the right dose doesn't make it better.
Yeah, like I gotta say, writing music on your own and writing with a band are two different experiences. And
Absolutely,
I know there's plenty of musicians out there in various different forms. Some people do it in songwriting partnerships, some do it as a whole band. You know, like I think that whole concept of a band is dead, I think that's just nonsensical. I mean, you can say that the majority of musicians out there, artists right now, tend to be like, you know, solo acts, but look, a lot of their music, if they're not writing it themselves, is written, as you say, by a team of people. Lots of different people come together and write the music. And I gotta say, like, when I was in bands, you can't compare the feeling of like working on a tune together as a band and the feeling, the rush you get when you know it's working, because you jam a ton of things, and a lot of it just, it doesn't go anywhere. But then every now and again you feel it. Like I remember the times in that first band I was in where we would just be jamming and it would be a transcending experience above the music, because the drummer would know exactly what I want him to do.
Yeah,
and
really
vice
neat.
versa. And it's like you're on that higher level. And I feel you can't really capture that in a solo capacity. It's different, you know.
I completely agree. It's a totally different process. And you know what? It's not as rewarding by any means, because I think you nail it there where you're talking about this. It's the communication. And it's weird. The communication when you're in the pocket with your band, or whichever way you want to describe it, whether it's live or rehearsal, when you're in that space, it's almost like the communication is not communication. It's the music. The music is telling the other musicians, because they're listening to you, but they're also playing properly. And right now they're not thinking. They're listening to you and they're playing through themselves. And if you ask them to start thinking right now, one of those two things are going to suffer real quick. And, you know, maybe the audience is not going to notice it, but the other musicians will. So it's almost like this sort of, you know, it's like a trust fall that happens that you do while you're playing, and, you know, when everybody's together. And but equally, when someone is not part of it, it's very easy to see.
It's like when you've got that chemistry together, like particularly when you're playing live, I can think of times when we would be playing and, you know, you make a mistake and you can cover it up or whatever. But like, here's a really good example. Sometimes, you know, you're waiting on the drummer to end the song, right? And let's say you're playing the guitar and you're getting to that final dun, 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 and he keeps going and you're like, well, we're waiting for him. and then it's okay. You just roll with it. You don't panic because you trust each other. And like you said, you got that connection. You're not sitting there. I mean, you might be thinking a little bit like, damn, man, I hope he ends it soon. But like
exactly.
you're kind of just like, I'll roll with it. Maybe this will lead somewhere. And often it does. And it's trust. It's chemistry.
And it's very satisfying when you take a band and you play a whole series of kids, because you go out on the road and you get to that place.
Yes.
Because you can play your parts properly, you can know all your parts and do a great first, second, third rehearsal. But when you're so many shows in and you're going from place to place and you're running on no sleep and everything, and the drummer's in charge in the right way. I love it when a drummer takes charge. It's one of my favorite things of all times. It's like, so much is easier as a musician when the drummer is in charge of what's happening.
As far as I'm concerned, the drummer and the bassist
keeps it so much better.
Drummer and the
together,
bass,
your rhythm is in charge. Yeah,
they're in charge. Yeah, everyone else is along for the ride. Like that's just you know what I mean.
I almost look at it, it's like a limousine, right? And there's the ceiling and you get to pop out and wave your hands every now and then. But the bassist is at the back, the drummer's up at the front, and they're going to take you to where you got to go. You get to sort of like
that's the thing as well. Out. When you see a band that's not ready to play live, or like there's not proper synergy in the band, and it's at the drummer or the bassist level, everything falls apart like big time. Because like if the drums and the bass are solid, but like I don't know, there's a mistake in the guitars or the vocalist messes up, like the rest of the band can recover it, but it's normally the bass
absolutely. It's like I would take like in the world of like what could go wrong, forgetting a line, singing off key, playing the wrong note, or falling off time. Timing is everything. Almost everything is almost forgivable once if timing is maintained.
Yes.
So, and that's just and that's a live music principle, but that's it. That's what's going to keep this music. That's what's, we talk about a song that somebody's going to invest in. Nobody invests in anything that's out of time. It's just too annoying. Even if it's not, it's just because there's no hiding it. You're either in time or you're not. So having that integral, but that's also funny. We have a saying in Canada, the drummers are like the goalies of music, which is a joke about how challenging it is to get a goalie together when you want to play hockey, because goalies have a lot of gear, they have a lot of pads, for every team, think about for every five, for every person playing on the ice, there's only two goalies, right? So having the right drummer and having the drummer with the right capability to play with you and do that, you hold them pretty sacred, right? So
for sure.
But we didn't in our band. We have no drummer. It's Connor. And Connor is actually quite a very good drummer, but he doesn't use a drum kit. He's literally pounding out percussion with different authentic percussion devices, from shakers and marachas. And we do have a snare, and we do have a kit on it, but the music, when you listen to the Cold City Kings album, you're going to hear a lot of really interesting percussion on that. And that's all Connor. And that's him learning to do it. That's not him as a C. That's him. And so I was really impressed, because that was one of our big issues as songwriters coming together. It's like, we can write all these great songs, but we can't make a good piece of music unless we have that percussive rhythm layer. And Neil, our bassist, is an incredible bassist. And, we call him the Neil estate agent. He's a great guy, and he keeps time, but he's so much better with a beat, keeping him to give him opportunity to shine, because he's also a really elegant bassist as well too, and he speaks a lot of really interesting musical phrases that most bassists probably wouldn't. So that's a lot of that came into that. But you're right, like putting together the right people and making a right song as a solo, I mean, you got to be pretty good. You got to have it all figured out, and you got to be pretty lucky. But I think together, collectively, is usually the best way to go. I once heard somebody say, for every hour for every say 4 hours you play music or practice music or perform music by yourself, is worth about 2 hours of playing with someone else, and it's worth about 1 hour of performing. So if you want to think about the value of that exercise to your own musical abilities, experiences, repertoire. So for an hour of performance, and if you're doing it right, you're gonna take away as much as you would get like 4 hours of playing by yourself. And then again, so you can do it by yourself all the time, but you're never really going to be getting the best experience, I think, unless you have somebody there to work with you.
So let's move it forward. You're partnered with
Sure.
a live music streaming platform known as Home Play. So tell us more about this
Yeah.
company and the nature of your partnership.
So, I mean, it's an informal partnership. It's nothing written down. We're not in cahoots in any form, but the business that has built this platform is managed, and this platform was developed, mostly by himself and a few other people at the company. He's one of my former bandmates, and he's been in the business of we'll call it live webcasting. There's a lot to moving packets across the internet when sound quality is a big concern. And so what they've done is they've built a platform that allows for a really high quality caliber of sound and video, not just from a compression perspective, because they actually take it out of compression and then recompress it, if you will, to put it out in a very large pipe that allows for you to get a much better sound experience than you're going to get out of any live platform you'll get that's connected to social media. But what they really want to do is give it as a tool that makes it relatively easy for you or me or anybody else to go online, do a performance, sell some tickets. They take a fee of the tickets. I think they take about 15% or whatever it might be. It reminds me of like a door at a bar or something like that. And the rest is pretty easy. They have a good team there. So when this started something more, the band couldn't get together. Cold City Kings couldn't get together because we're in lockdown, just like you guys. So, and so I had all these songs that I'd been working on. That's what you had heard on Reddit were songs that I'd been working on that I started around COVID and I just finished. And so they were just songs that I'd been, I now had the time to figure out. But we'd released the album and we couldn't really, we are going to be releasing some videos collectively as a band. They'll be like produced, like I do a piece and Connor does his piece, and we've got Holiday, which is going to come out, which is going to be really nice. But I also was like, look, I want to keep the kind of the buzz going or keep traction with some content. And I had some time and they hooked me up with some gear. And so I did a few streams for them and it was great. And I also did a bunch of recording of my own. And I'm still figuring that out myself because, recording yourself is just, I find that's another thing. Producing music on your own is not anywhere near as joyful as it is when you're doing it with somebody else.
Yes.
Because it can be extremely frustrating to hold the musician's hat and then the producer's hat in the same moment at the same time when you're trying to do something that you could get done a lot easier if there was two of you, right? Or three of you. So for me, that's where that sort of stuff came from. And then what's really good is I got a lot of really good response from it. And I've got some gear here. So we're actually going to produce a few more of those songs properly. We'll release them on Spotify as the next push out for Cold City Kings. But we've got enough done and written and ready to go that we're gonna have content ready to go every couple of months for quite some time. So it's a drag that we can't play live, and hopefully we'll be able to get back to that maybe by fall, I believe, if I'm not thinking too far in the future. But creatively it's been one of the best experiences I've ever had. And professionally I'm also in the technology world professionally as well too. So I don't just pay the bills as a middle-aged folk singer, believe it or not. Don't think as big of a moneymaker that type of stuff is.
Yeah, you work as a tech executive, is that right?
I do. I've been in tech my whole life, and so I've been in tech for as long as I've been in music. I think the two are very can be harmoniously linked.
Okay.
The right technology. But I'm I'm not a big fan of. I live a very analog life, because I have a lot of history and experience in technology. It's like, you know, and I'm, you know, I've been blessed. I've had a good career, and I'm still going, but I've become significantly better at my career as I've become a better musician and a more dedicated musician and a more active musician. I'm in sales, and I'll tell you, you know, what's hard. This is what's hard. It's hard to get some guy or some dude at some bar on the other end of the province to call you back to get you booked in for an opening set and try to secure a hotel rate through him and get you guys fed, and maybe we could get $200 or $300 for the gig. That's hard. It's really not anywhere near as hard as saying, look, you know, your environment is just riddled with technology problems, and here are the solutions. Would you like to pay for that? And they would say yes. So those two experiences, the harder you get on one, the easier that you start to see the other one. And I'm not a materialistic person. Mm-hmm. I enjoy working hard, and I like accomplishing goals, but I'm not, you know, I like guitars. It's about as vain as I get in my life. Everything else, you know, I like to make sure everything just works. That's the only reason I have it. Right.
I'm the same, man.
Yeah.
Like I find myself only really caring about sentimental things, like objects, like things that remind me of good times, memories, people. Like, of course I would love to own, you know, these guitars and this thing and that thing, but it's like, I don't know that necessarily makes you happy. I mean, if things like bring you closer towards achieving your goals, then great. But actual acquisition of just stuff, I don't think ever really makes you happy.
And you know what? I'm just one of those people too that just, like, I don't like being sold to. I don't like being sold to, and I sell to, and so I try to keep that in mind when I sell. So I'm not going to waste anybody's time, but I don't like being sold to, and I always hate being sold to when I'm not looking for something. So in other words, like, I'm not a big fan. I hate advertising, and nothing against people in marketing. I love people in marketing, but the whole idea of just influencing people through gimmicks in one form or another, it drives me crazy. And I don't like to be part of that, but sometimes you can't avoid it. I mean, it's part of our industry too. You know, I was reading something interesting. So here's something else. The arc of the Beatles, from Elvis to the Beatles to present day musicification, if you will, follows a very similar arc to the creation and exploitation of the teenage market. Okay. And it wasn't until businesses would actually, because before Elvis and the Beatles, businesses would rarely think that teenagers would have any money to spend on anything. They don't work. They wouldn't cater to the market. There wasn't anything for them. Right. You know, especially in Europe, right? Because you're coming out of post-war, right? So there's nothing there for teenagers, right? Like, you know, half of those rock and rollers will tell you, I grew up in a miserable damn house. Because they dealt with this post-war life, right? Either somebody come back from the war, or they lived in poverty, like Paul McCartney talks about it, John Lennon talks about it, Robert Plant talks about it, Jimmy Page talks about it. They're like, yeah, our fathers and grandfathers were from a generation that suffered pretty hard for a long time. So there wasn't a whole lot of fun stuff that's going on. But when the Beatles show up, and all the merchandising and marketing and stuff that eventually, I think, is one of the things that caused their manager to kill himself, was that they had lost that as revenue. But he created this exploitation. So look how many teenagers, look at the size of this market. Look at them show up at the Ed Sullivan Show. You know, when a television show in Los Angeles, famous for being the #1 television show, all of a sudden quadruples its viewership in one night because it has 4 kids from Liverpool on it. The whole world goes crazy. And this is part of an industry that's always followed music. And it's not a good part of it. It's the part of it that says, hey, kids are turned on by something. Now let's sell them a bunch of shit they don't need, right? Like, and it's just part of it, right? And you know, and you have artists that are like, yeah, I gotta eat this. I signed a record deal. So I don't have a choice. I gotta make my record. And everybody who owns this process, from putting vinyl from a machine into your cabinet, is a machine I gotta eat. And I feel for them, and they do their life, and that's probably why they get really good as artists, because they're like, the only thing I can do now is I'm owned by these types of things. And so that's part of it. And so you see it now, and as an artist now, and I'm like, I just want to make good songs. I want to write a good piece of music. I want people to like it. But I also feel like there's gotta be, and I've also, as a technologist, I've also tried this many times. I've always been invested in where the technology can best serve the interest of the listener and the artist, and collapse the experience that's necessary, that would have been there back in the vinyl days from that entire world, that really pushed that artist into a comfortable place. That doesn't have to happen now. We don't have any of those business costs involved in creating labels with guys with cigars that used to screw musicians anymore, right? Like, you can produce a song, I can produce a song, we can put it out on a platform. What bugs me is that those platforms tell us that it's about plays and numbers, but their business is about monetizing a data metric that they will get exponential value from one single one of our listeners. Like, that's the part about it I think most musicians don't understand. They're like Spotify, YouTube, the rest of it. Like, I use the example.
It's not where the money is. It's not where the money is.
But think about it this way, right? So what Spotify is ultimately, what all algorithm-based systems are, all they're trying to do is create more successful predictive advertising. Not just like, here's the data, let's advertise to them. It's like, we have enough data to tell you what they're going to do. Let's advertise, and let's predict what they're going to do and advertise then. That's why when they say we make money on advertising, Facebook makes money on advertising. They don't. Google, they make money on predictive analytics. So that's a little bit different than saying, okay, yeah, you can put a billboard in my way, but now you know when I'm home, so you're gonna wait till I get home before you put the billboard in my living room. That's a bit different in the relationship. And when we use music, we can figure out so much about somebody. Like Peter Frampton, are you a fan? Frampton Comes Alive, one of the greatest live albums ever made. Ooh, Baby, I Love Your Way.
Oh, yeah.
Peter Frampton, great guitarist, great Englishman. So Frampton Comes Alive, Ooh, Baby, I Love Your Way, had something like, I don't know, 8 million streams or whatever it is, some really high number on Spotify. And at the end of the day, Frampton gets like 11 grand for that experience. Okay. But what Spotify gets out of it is it knows every dad at 46 who's driving past the Home Depot listening to Ooh, Baby, I Love Your Way. And even though they're saying, look, artist, you've had so many plays. It's like, yeah, metrics. Half of those plays made you twice as much money as those plays would make me, if not more. And every time somebody else does it, you and I go back in there and push more music, and we participate in more Spotify stuff, we get more and more identifiable. The bag of data that they get to mine for for their benefit, not ours. Their benefit and our benefit, they say our benefit is that we'll recommend music you like. It's like exposure. Do you remember when somebody says, would you like to play for exposure? It's like, I will have own all the data, the value of every data metric of your piece of content, but I will allow you to participate, allow you to like play with your song under my supervision, under my rules. And that's the problem with that. Like, that there is no real clear way of articulating that to other than say that, and that's not what Spotify even want to do. I'm interested in more of the non-fungible tokens. I'm a big blockchain believer. At least that's the only sort of path up from a technology perspective. We've got to get to, if we're going to get to trusted networks, we've got to get to trusted architecture first. And
yes,
I'm not saying blockchain is like, the divine math of perfect harmony, but it's definitely better than hub and spoke data center architecture that can't even secure networks or even antivirus on, let alone can we make sure that this number is actually this number. So I like that. I like the idea of it. I like the idea of an artist having a token relationship and a fan having an exponential opportunity with that token. That's cool to me, because that's sort of like, it's almost the entire idea of saying like why do you buy, like why is there a collectible market behind music? There's a huge collectible market behind music. Records, memorabilia, tickets, posters. People consume a huge amount of memorabilia with music. And that memorabilia market is based on exponential growth. So for example, if I had a poster that was in good condition from like 64 in Hamburg, Germany, that was like Das Beatles playing tonight, and it was signed by, you know, Ingrid, their German friend, like that piece of paper would be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars right now. So why wouldn't a token exponentially grow when you now invest in a piece of art because you love it, but you also think other people are going to love it? So how that drives the scarcity of your tokenship makes sense to me. It doesn't seem exploitive, right? And so that's why I think art as the key part of what a token is supposed to represent does actually kind of make sense. I might be missing something, but so long as it can't be exploited and hacked and made, you know, so as it's ledger based and everybody has visibility to everything, I see it as probably the next big future for music right now. That and 5G networks getting the need for compression to disappear as we move music across networks. So that'll be cool.
What's the biggest life lesson you've learned so far?
That you are I think the greatest thing a person can have in life is a true sense of themselves. And I think most problems in life come from people who do not have a true understanding of who they are. And part of that is to accept that you don't know the answer to that, and you have to let your relationship with other people in the universe help you figure that out. But you know, whether you think about the things you do in ego or the things you do in anger or the things you do that you regret in life, I think it's because you do those things because either at the time you're really certain who you are and you're wrong, you know, and you probably don't figure it out until later. So that's it. Like for me, that's sort of what I just try to live on, is that, you know, you're also the sum total of all the decisions you make. And so, you know, you can take that for whatever you want, either trust yourself or don't trust yourself. But, you know, you choose to go left, you choose to go right. You wake up, some people go left one day and they die. Some people go right one day and they find a lottery ticket. It's a weird universe that way. But yeah, that's it. Just know yourself and just be happy to be around to participate in this madness. That's it. I think that the rest of it sort of figures itself out. And I don't know. Don't piss on an electric fence. There we go. It's another good.
Is that from personal experience?
Just being on a farm, you know, it's just general advice.
Okay.
Usable advice. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
No problem.
As we draw things to a close for today, do you have any upcoming projects or maybe some final thoughts that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, you know, I think what you're doing is cool. I've really enjoyed this. This has been a lot of fun. It's been a nice break for this, you know, everybody's life. I hope everybody's doing well. Keep tabs on Cold City Kings. If you like our music, play it, let us know, share it. We'll be making more. And, you know, you can find us on the intertubes at coldcitykings.com. And, but I think you can just shout our name out into any listening device at some point, and it might produce a sound. So we'll see. But again, I really appreciate it. And I also wanted to say, I think you've got something pretty special too. I think you've got a real charisma, and I think you've got a real earnesty about what you're doing in your life right now. And I know sometimes, especially at that age in your 20s, it's a weird time in your life because you're starting to reconcile what I say is the first book of falsehoods, which is most of everything you're told when you're a kid, to what's actually going on. And then you the rest of your life is going to be another version of you sort of reconciling a lot more falsehoods. It just keeps, a little phrase I heard once, and I love phrases, I store them in my mind all the time, was that when I was in my 20s, I was really concerned about, what the world thought of me. And then in my 30s and 40s, I became strong enough to not care what the world thought of me. And then in my 50s, I realized the world wasn't thinking about me at all. And to some degree, that's sort of where I think you get to some point where you're like, wow, a lot of this rhetoric about success and destiny and dreams and happiness, whether it be in relationships or financial or the rest of this, there's a lot of noise out there, and you sometimes don't get even to hear above that noise level. Like, people live in Niagara Falls, they don't hear the falls anymore. They just like talk really loud to everybody all the time. They don't even realize it. So you get to that point, and then at some point you're going to be fine. But I think you've got something pretty special, and I think any time you spend, and I will tell people, I think your creative endeavors are sincere, but your skills may require more sharpening. I think you've got some great creative skills that I think can take you in a really, really, really good direction. And when that happens, I can be like, hey, I remember being on this guy's podcast. It's pretty cool. So keep it up, man.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I will say, for me, I think my attitude has changed a lot, especially just doing this podcast, doing YouTube, doing music. Like,
yeah,
I'm caring less and less what people think, for a couple of reasons. Like, one, people hate you, like, whatever you do in life. You can be Mother Teresa and people still hate you. So you got to follow.
See, I disagree. I don't think people hate anybody. I think people hate themselves, and they have a real bad relationship with people who don't. And they can say all kinds of things, like, because you know what, you can say the most hateful people out there, the things that'll do the hateful shit to you, are psychopathic people that are sitting beside you at some point and you think are a friend. But the people that try to hate on you from a distance, and I've taught my kids this as well too, like, not to get too think, but this is really their problem. They're yelling at you because of the voice in their head that hates them, and that's why they do it. And nothing you do will ever change that. And they will yell at every person they can. And that's whether you're angry at a politician all day and you can't stand the way the world runs and you spend your time hating online, or if you're barking at people in the street, or if you're bullying people, you don't want to. It doesn't bring you joy. If it brings you joy, you have a chemical problem in your mind. If psychologists classify that, you're a sadist or you're a psychopath. But that's not most people. That's my fundamental belief. And it's hard because I think that's where you don't have a sense of yourself. You're projecting your false sense of yourself onto me, trying to use his hateful language or his hateful rhetoric. And if you want to come at me and physically hurt me and break the law and do this type of stuff, that's a different conversation altogether. But this type of garbage that we get, I think we all need to rise above it and call it out for what it is, that this is your insecurities talking. It's not mine, because this says way more about you than it does about anything I would do. And that's my final message, regardless if you're worried about anybody hating on you. Because lonely, attention hoarding, empty souls are people that hate. But that's my thoughts.
Thank you very much for being a great guest, for giving us some great advice. I think all of us listening, I know I've learned a lot from this. And
well, I appreciate that. Thanks for letting me go on like an idiot.
It's been a pleasure, honestly. I always like talking to fellow musicians anyway. And it's one of the reasons I like doing this podcast is every time I have someone on, it's a completely different person, a different mindset, background, everything. And I think that we're all here to learn at the end of the day, whether we want to sort of accept that or not. And I'd like to think I have a pretty open mind these days, and it's always a pleasure to just learn every time from someone completely new from a different part of the world and everything. And
I know, yeah, it's pretty cool. There's 10 billion assholes are like opinions. Everyone's got one, right? And true. So there's about 8 billion of them out there right now. So
madness. Yeah. Okay.
Listen. Well, I appreciate it. I've got to sign off. I really enjoyed it, and let's keep tabs on each other. And again, Christian, it was a really pleasure meeting you. And
absolute pleasure
I'm glad
to
be connected to you.
Thank you very much. Care. And I want to say a big thank you to everyone listening to the Christian Reeve podcast. Make sure you go and check out Cold City Kings. And thank you very much for listening. Until next time, peace out, one love. I'll see you in the next one.